The first session is Climate Crisis in the US, Why We Need to Act Now. Joining us on screen from the US shortly will be John Osborn, USA Director of Ad Net Zero, and Josh Lockwood, the Vice President of the American Red Cross Climate Crisis Campaign, to tell us why we need to act now. So I'm hoping, by the powers of the digital world, we'll see Josh and John in just a moment. I will hand it over to you. Welcome, John and Josh.
Well, it's great to be here. Hopefully you can hear us coming through loud and clear. I have spent a career in advertising. Truth be told, I love advertising, but I was thinking of a fun way to start, and I have a confession to make. And that is that long before I even knew what advertising was, I thought about what I wanted to be when I grew up. And maybe I was inspired by the ad we saw just prior to the lunch break. But confession alert, I always wanted to be a weatherman. Not just any weatherman, but a meteorologist. Not just any meteorologist, a TV meteorologist. And I'm not exactly sure why, but it probably had something to do with my childhood. When I grew up, I loved storms, whether it was a thunderstorm coming over the tree line or a winter snowstorm that might cause school to be canceled. I can still recall the blizzard of '78 when it snowed for 3 straight days and the snow reached over my head. And I learned for the first time about thunder snow. When did thunder snow become a real thing? But I digress. My fascination with weather probably has to do with how hypnotized I was watching the television set at the brave and fearless TV reporters. You know, the kind of people that they hand a microphone to and push them into the elements. I'm sure you have them in London or across Europe. We certainly have them here in the United States. And the first thing I think of when I see it is, don't try this at home. But there they are, the intrepid reporter, standing in the rain, the sleet, the snow, helping them. Well, I didn't go down that road in life, but I chose the second best thing, advertising. You could say that I was built for a good storm, and that's because when I see smoke on the horizon, I lean forward and not back. I feel an innate desire to try and fix things, to make them better, and even help others. Maybe you in the room feel that way from time to time as well. And that's precisely the reason I'm so passionate about Net Zero and why I've chosen to join this powerful movement as the U.S. Director for Net Zero here in the States. Here in the U.S., Net Zero has been incredibly active the past several weeks. And we're successfully out of the gate prepping for our launch, building awareness, the press presence, beginning to strengthen our bonds with all of the industry associations here in the States, and we've even welcomed our latest members, more of whom we look forward to announcing shortly. And in terms of awareness, we had our first center stage appearance just 3 weeks ago as part of Advertising Week here in the United States. Another big event at Net Zero made a splash was at the annual ANA, the Association of National Advertisers annual conference that happened just a week and a half ago in Orlando, Florida. We gathered and welcomed multiple different brands and agency partners, and they rallied around the important cause related to climate action and sustainability. Head of the ANA, Bob Leodis, and board chair Mark Richards, Procter & Gamble, talk about the importance of Net Zero and about aligning the marketing and advertising industry focused on emission standards, metrics, and about changing behavior. So we've already got some great momentum, and that's important because while we're talking about weather, we have a storm of a different type on our horizon. And it's all connected to everything we have going on. We simply can't miss our moment to make things better and to fix things for the generations that will follow. But I know that you know that. So rather than talk about the importance of carbon reduction, because there's plenty of that there, I want to paint a picture of the scene here in the United States. And to do that, I'm joined by Josh Lockwood from the American Red Cross. You know, I decided to join the Red Cross by accident actually. It was actually in 2012 when I was at BBDO and we were doing some commercial work, some advertising work for the American Red Cross. And it was actually harder than it sounds. I mean, how hard is it to really put a spotlight on all of the amazing things the Red Cross does? Especially since everyone knows that the Red Cross is there for things like wildfires and blizzards and tornadoes, large-scale disasters. But did they know about the local town fire or the small town fire or the local disaster? Through the experience of that advertising campaign, I was frankly absolutely hooked. Hooked on advertising. I learned that anything that we do for the Red Cross and everything that we talk about needs to be real and authentic. The stories that we shared were ultimately from the voices, and they were filmed by the people that we touched, the clients whose lives that we helped improved in the face of those disasters. And through that, I learned that I needed to be a part of this mission. So I joined the board of directors for the American Red Cross, which is the largest chapter for the Red Cross in the US. And I came on board roughly at the same time that Josh Lockwood did. Because when we joined in 2012, it was real, really real, as real as life and death, because the United States was hit and hit hard by Superstorm Sandy at the time. Not a hurricane by definition, but it certainly packed a punch, and it was awe-inspiring to see the Red Cross in action. And now I've seen the Red Cross in action over and over and over again. And that's the point at which I just want to double down, because that's what's really concerning. The sheer number and the severity of the storms hitting the United States is growing by leaps and bounds. Even right now, there's a storm, Tropical Storm Nicole, barreling towards the east coast of Florida. This is just a couple of weeks after a separate hurricane hit the west coast of the state, impacting thousands and taking lives. So our calling is more pressing, more important than ever before. We need to take action. And if we take action, we can make a real difference. Nothing brought this to life more than when a group of us from the American Red Cross, including Josh, who you'll see in just a second, when we joined together to visit Puerto Rico in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria. And we saw firsthand not only the impact, but the impact of the relief efforts of the American Red Cross. I think you're looking at an image right now of some solar panels. Those were the exact solar panels that we put on top of schools that served as important shelters a little bit later, just recently, for example, when Hurricane Ian rolled through the islands, or water pumps that ensured that water wouldn't be cut off in future disasters. And through that experience, I learned that we could make a real difference. Look, I could go on and on, but that's not the point. The point is that whatever you're calling, when it comes to sustainability, to reducing carbon emissions, and to advertising, our calling is calling, and it's calling right now. While it's true, I did love storms as a child, I've now discovered that in a way, I'm built for a good storm. I'm thrilled to be a part of the AdNet Zero mission here in the United States and to talk a little bit more about the climate situation here in the States and the storms that we face, both real and metaphorical, is my colleague Josh Lockwood, who's heading up client actions and initiatives related to the American Red Cross here in the United States. As mentioned previously, he's vice president in charge of climate and sustainability for the Red Cross, and we're thrilled to have him here with us today. A beautiful day, I might add, here in the Northeast, just outside of New York City, which is where I'm calling in from. And it's great to be a part of this important meeting of this summit. Without further ado, let's hear about what's going on in the U.S. through the words of my colleague, Josh Lockwood. Take it away, Josh.
Thank you, John, for that very warm introduction. And it is such a privilege to be able to talk to all of you today about the work of the American Red Cross and what we can do collectively to make a difference. As you may or may not know, the American Red Cross has a mission to alleviate suffering and save lives in the face of disasters, something we do 60,000 times per year in the United States. And that's everything from a home fire to a hurricane, to a mass shooting, to a wildfire. American Red Cross has this awesome responsibility to be in every community in America whenever we're needed to help people in their darkest moments. And John is being humble in part of his introduction because some of the amazing work that John helped us with at the American Red Cross is to ensure that the brand of the Red Cross remained relevant in spite of our 140 years in age. So the work of BBDO and John and his team really helped to refresh our image and our understanding among a new generation of Red Cross supporters, which is so vital to us because 90% of the Red Cross workforce across the United States is volunteers. It's people like John with busy family lives, busy work lives, but who somehow carve out time to help us help people in their darkest moments. There's been a few moments in our 140-year history at the American Red Cross where we've needed to adapt our mission. And the challenges posed by a warming climate represents one of those moments. We at the American Red Cross are facing a generational crisis that our country also faces and our world also faces. In the 1980s, there were on average 2.9 disasters per year that caused $1 billion in damage in the United States. That number over the past several years has increased to over 20 disasters per year, causing $1 billion in damage across the United States. So a 6 or 7-fold increase in the number of billion-dollar disasters across America. And what that means for the American Red Cross and the communities we serve is that we need to reach 6 times as many people who have just run for their lives after a hurricane. We need to provide 6 times as many meals and supplies and financial assistance and sheltering to these people who've just lost everything and need that warmth and support that the American Red Cross can provide. And for any mission and any business faced with a 6-fold, 7-fold increase in their workload, it really is a reckoning, and it requires us to step back and rethink how we're going about our work, because at the end of the day, the American Red Cross must be there for every single person who needs our help, because there really is no other option. Overlaying that increase in intensity and frequencies of these large disasters caused by a warming climate is also who is being affected by these disasters. About a quarter of Americans have no emergency savings. And those are the people the American Red Cross is serving more than any other. The people we see in our shelters, the people who are suffering the most from these recurring disasters have very little to begin with. And these are families that we are now beginning to see year after year in some of the same communities that have an overlay of climate risk, but also have an overlay of social vulnerability. And so as we think about the awesome challenge in front of us at the American Red Cross to help these growing numbers of people in need, we're also thinking about how can we make sure that we're serving those most vulnerable in these moments. And so we have tremendous volunteers like John Osborn who are helping us think through these strategic challenges and have helped to chart out a plan for us moving forward to be able to have greater force multipliers in play, to have new strategies and innovations at play, to help us reach more people more quickly than ever before. And I'll share some highlights now before we lead to any questions folks may have in the audience. One thing we're doing at the American Red Cross is basic workforce development. We are hiring a new kind of worker and recruiting a new kind of volunteer in the areas across America that are most vulnerable to climate shocks. That means people who have the skills and ability to knit together community-based partnerships among many different not-for-profits, but convened by the American Red Cross to ensure that those not-for-profits and government agencies and even small businesses are better positioned before, during, and after disasters to be resilient and to help serve people in need in that community. We're also hiring people who look and sound like the people we serve from the most vulnerable communities in America. There's been some really interesting articles and research done in America recently about people suffering most from disasters. And there's a big gap in terms of the services and access to supports that white populations receive versus communities of color. And we are determined at the American Red Cross to help bridge that gap through stronger representation and stronger community partnerships to ensure that communities that desperately need financial assistance, food, shelter, are accessing those supports when needed in ways that are not happening in the way that we would like to see right now. We're also embracing technology and innovation in new and exciting ways. John referenced when I came to the American Red Cross as the CEO in the New York City area about 10 years ago, Superstorm Sandy struck. And I recall looking at all of our assets that we had at the Red Cross, vehicles, shelters, feeding stations, and they were all represented on Post-its on a map that would periodically fall off as we were extending our relief operation over many months. What we've done now at the American Red Cross is institute a GIS mapping technology that overlays vulnerable populations, weather systems, all of our Red Cross assets, all of our partner assets, to make sure that we're making smarter decisions in real time to reach more people more quickly with a more surgical approach that makes a better use of resources. And that allows us to much more strongly respond to these major events rather than just indiscriminately blanketing a geography with resources. We're also providing new forms of financial assistance. One of the most powerful things we can do at the American Red Cross is simply to give lightning quick financial assistance to families who've just run for their lives and they need replacement clothing, replacement medicines, things to get through those first days. But we're also seeing that a few months out, those same families might need a car repaired that was damaged in stormwaters or a roof patched so they can continue to live in their home. And so we at the American Red Cross are making something called bridge financial assistance to those families to make sure they're better positioned. We're also taking a much more aggressive and surgical approach to our preparedness initiatives. We're going into the communities that are most affected by these major disasters, that are most devastated by these disasters, and providing real-time information about threats in those communities before disaster strikes to let families do disaster drills on their own to make sure that their lives are safe when disaster strikes, but also make smart decisions about their family in advance of disasters, and think about where they're living, the risks in that area. What does it mean if a wildfire tears through the neighborhood? What does it mean if floodwaters rise in that neighborhood? What are the tactics you and your family need to know? So we physically go into homes and provide that training to families and walk through their home disaster drill for them. And we do that tens of thousands of times a year. We're going to do it more than ever in communities across America because we find there's no substitute for that person-to-person contact that we're providing. We're also at the American Red Cross undertaking work not just in the United States, but I know we have a global audience on this in this session today. Because the American Red Cross is a wealthier Red Cross that exists in a lot of the over 190 countries that have a Red Cross or Red Crescent society across the world, we're similarly making investments in countries that may not have the resources that we do, but have high climate risk. So we'll invest in early warning systems. We'll invest in nature-based solutions to make coastlines safer, all intended to save lives amid the hundreds of thousands of people worldwide who are at increasing risk of these climate shocks. At the end of the day, we at the American Red Cross are dedicated to alleviating suffering wherever we find it. We welcome volunteers of all stripes. If folks have a few hours to give or have 40 hours a week to give, we'll gladly put you to work wherever you live around the world. So I just encourage folks to think about that. We need you. The world needs you. And we're so excited just to be able to partner with AdNet Zero and all the great folks in this session today on making the world a little bit safer and a little bit kinder in the months and years to come. Thank you. I think now we might open things up to a few questions.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Josh and John. So much to think about based on what you were saying. And I have to say, John, it was interesting you were saying that you wanted to be a TV weather presenter at the start of your career, because I'm a TV journalist and have been through many outdoor reporting scenarios, and it does wear thin after a while. I quite like being dry these days. But of course, what we're talking about is not your everyday storm. We're talking about huge-scale disasters. And I've had two questions that have come in, which are quite similar, really. So I will put them to you. Essentially, it's kind of people that are watching and wanting to know what they can do. So one person says, how can everyday advertising professionals encourage their organizations to get involved, use advertising's power to support charity causes? And similarly, another question, it looks like you're preparing for a climate scenario in the US where support needed is going to increase. What can people working in advertising specifically do to help? Josh, what would you say?
Oh gosh, well, it's such a great question. And I have to say, John Osborn, who I worked so closely with for many years, has been a constant resource for us. And I can give a couple of examples. One is helping us to communicate to the general public about the power of the Red Cross mission and how to reach the next generation of supporters in ways that we internally sort of lose the thread on. So that's been really helpful. But I also want to say that one area that John has been incredibly helpful is our internal communications. At the Red Cross, those of us who are active, we see a lot of human suffering, and it's very challenging at times to meet people who've just lost loved ones, who've just run for their lives. And sometimes we need help in messaging to our own workforce of staff and volunteers, how to motivate them, how to encourage them, how to thank them. And having a communications or advertising professional in your corner is really a game changer. So I think getting involved with the leadership and asking about the unique challenges of that not-for-profit agency can make a big difference.
Okay, thank you, Josh. And final word for you, John, before we go.
Just very quickly, no time like the present. We're living in a time where companies are looking to reestablish culture, and study after study shows that people want to join organizations that have some positive impact on the society at large. Similarly, study after study shows across really pretty much every demographic that people want to buy from or do business with brands that also do some good for the broader world in general. So no time like the present. I think, we're in the communications business. Speak up, let your voice be known. And more and more, we're seeing pitches that ask for companies to talk about their efforts related to advertising and sustainability. Similarly, we see this trend continuing into the future. So regardless of which aperture you're looking through, we think it's an important place to be, as well as an important cause to be a part of from a cultural perspective.
Thank you so much. John Osborn, Josh Lockwood. Can we give them a round of applause? Hopefully you can hear from where you are.